Part 11. The Liu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yoon. Chapter 101. Chapter 101 Small Pendant. Little sister, let go, this Doraemon is very fierce, Gujin-chu said patiently while holding the girl's hand. I don't. Doraemon is very good, I want to hug him. The little girl hugged Luza's legs and said stubbornly. The children over there saw the girl hugging her tightly and rushed forward. In an instant, Luza's legs were covered with little pendants. Luza's was sweating profusely in the doll at the moment, and he was a little impatient, but the children kept rushing up. I'm coming too, a boy shouted. Luza's and Gujin-chu looked in the direction of the sound and suddenly became frightened. It seemed something was not going well. It was too late for Gujin-chu to stop him. The impact of the little fat kid made Luza's lose his balance and he immediately fell to the ground. Luza's was sitting on the ground in a state of embarrassment, surrounded by noisy children. By coincidence, Zhang Wanan and Zhang Baihui, who had been sitting there, heard the sound and came out. Doraemon, Zhang Wanan was extremely surprised when she saw the embarrassed doll. She looked at Doraemon, who was surrounded by children, and screamed and rushed forward. Luza's who was still sitting, was knocked down and lay on the ground. But it was his little girl who threw herself in front of him. Luza's in the costume smiled with satisfaction and stretched out his hand to stop his little girl. Zhang Wanan hugged his neck tightly at this moment, gave the puppet's headband a fierce kiss, and said loudly, I like you so much. Just like it, my little girl. Luza's responded silently in his heart. Lulin and Lin 11, who had been watching the show, couldn't help but smile with satisfaction when they saw this scene. Unexpectedly, their son had a very high emotional intelligence and captured the hearts of many girls, and most importantly, Zhang Wanan. Luza's lay on the ground and hugged his little girl quietly. He no longer cared about the pendants on his legs. It would be nice to have her. He suddenly felt that although he was a little embarrassed, this was the ending he wanted. Enan, why don't you take off the hood and see if Luza's is still breathing? Gujin-chu, who was standing aside, said in a very distressing manner. Huh? Luza's who? You said it's your brother here. Zhang Wanan looked confused. She thought this was someone hired by her parents to surprise her. She held up her arms and tried to get up, but Luza's used his other hand to press her head down again and muttered, she's still alive, just lie down for a while. Zhang Wanan blushed but did not struggle. She lay down and hugged him tightly. This hug seemed to last for a century, and she suddenly felt that the world was quiet, as if only the two of them were left. When Luza's got up again, his legs had been crushed by the children until he felt unconscious. Moreover, the culprits had already eaten and left. Only he gritted his teeth and felt the numbness in his legs. Zhang Wanan knelt on the ground and took off his hood to see him dripping with sweat. Are you tired? Zhang Wanan wiped the sweat from his forehead in pain. For you, I'm not tired. Zhang Wanan smiled and asked again, are your legs numb? Yeah, but I still feel my heart, it's just beating a little fast, Luza's said. Huh? I saw on TV that many people with fast heartbeats have heart disease. Do you want to tell your parents that we go to the hospital? Zhang Wanan said innocently. Luza's rolled his eyes helplessly in his heart, thinking that this little girl really doesn't understand romance. Do you want to go? Zhang Wanan was a little anxious when he didn't answer. Stop jumping, Luza's said angrily. If you don't jump, wouldn't you die, Zhang Wanan said uncertainly. End of this chapter. The Liu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yoon. Chapter 102. Chapter 102, Watching a Pretty Boy's Performance. Luza's thought to himself, how could he end up like this after finally being romantic? He stood up and limped upstairs, holding onto the handrail. Zhang Wanan followed cautiously and asked, aren't you going to the hospital? Don't watch TV anymore, loses who said. Loses who went back to his room and changed his clothes. Jongwanan sat on the bed and looked at her toes and asked, I heard the three of you talking in the bathroom just now. Are you wearing these clothes? Yes, you said you like Doraemon. I have been preparing for this day for a long time, and I have been waiting for this day for a long time, he said. Jongwanan looked around embarrassedly. It turned out that she was too stingy. Loses whose hand when opening the door suddenly paused. So you were the one who closed the door loudly. Huh? What am I? I don't know, I'm going to sleep. After Jongwanan said that, he seemed to be running away. Loses who couldn't help but smile when he saw her fleeing back. It turns out she is really a little girl. Jongwanan returned to the room and closed the door, then locked it and turned on the light, all at once. She covered her little beating heart, thinking how embarrassing it would be if Loses who knew that she was so stingy, and she didn't want to admit it. Hearing Jongwanan close the door, Loses who sat at the table and took out a book and read it carefully, coughing and reading aloud from time to time. Lin 11 may have seen the light in his room, knocked on the door and asked him what he was doing. Loses who simply explained that he was accumulating knowledge. It wasn't until very late that Loses who closed his book and went to bed. However, this phenomenon occurred again in the garden the next morning. Lin 11 went out with Lu Lin in the morning, intending to smell the flowers and walk unexpectedly. As soon as they went out, they saw Loses who standing upright at the door, and he was still mumbling. Lin 11 was startled by him. Her magical brain circuit made her think that her son was sick. She reached out and touched Loses who's head, and asked cautiously, Are you okay, son? It's okay, Loses who replied without looking back, and then continued to ramble. No. You're not crazy. Lu Lin's eyes widened when he saw Loses who's performance. No. It can't be. Lin 11 also looked at Loses who nervously. I'm fine, I'm not sick, I'm not crazy. Just feel free to take a walk and don't disturb me. Loses who ruthlessly drove away the chattering couple. After breakfast, Loses who couldn't help but drag Jongwanan and ran to the garden. Sit on it. Loses who pointed to the rocking chair and said. Why? Jongwanan was suddenly pulled out and did not react. Beautiful boy, let me perform a show for you, Loses who said narcissistically. Jongwanan smiled and sat down and whispered, Narcissistic? What are you performing? Jongwanan asked. Recitation, Loses who answered. What? Jongwanan looked at him in surprise and asked, Reciting? What are you reciting? I just want to recite it. I want to find an audience, can't I? Loses who hesitated and said embarrassedly. Suddenly Jongwanan said oh meaningfully and said, Please start your performance. I'm going to write a limerick. Come here, wait for the handsome guy to perform. Jongwanan sat upright. Loses who coughed twice solemnly, then took out the prepared water, took a sip, and said, I'll start if you tell me to start. Jongwanan nodded and said, Let's get started. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Lu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yoon. Chapter 103. Chapter 103. We have a clear understanding of each other. You are from Yuanmo, Yunnan, and I am from Zhuqiao, Beijing. I hold your furry little hand and bite it gently. Ah! It is love that makes us walk upright. Loses who? Loses who coughed twice again and cleared his throat before he started to perform the prepared limerick. You are from Yuanmo, Yunnan, and I am from Zhuqiao, Beijing. I hold your furry little hand and bite it lightly. Ah! It is love that makes us stand upright. Walk. Loses who solemnly finished a verse of limerick, and then looked at Jongwanan expectantly. Jongwanan looked confused and said, No. I don't understand. He knew. Loses who raised his head and sighed. He mustered up so much courage to say that she didn't understand. Loses who stepped forward, took Jongwonan's hand, pulled her up, gave her a gentle kiss and walked forward, saying, "That's it?" Jongwonan realized that she was being flirted with, and she lowered her head in embarrassment and smiled, her face also turning red. But if she could raise her head and take a look, she would see that Loses whose ears were also very red. "I know why you suddenly pulled me to read aloud," Jongwonan said suddenly. Why, Loses who asked uncomfortably as his eyes wandered around. "You are jealous. You are doing the same thing as on TV. My mother and I have seen it," Jongwonan said. "The little girl must be kept away from her mother in the future, otherwise what if she tries to be romantic or something like that in the TV series?" "Is it because Jiangbai Hui is?" Jongwonan asked. Who is it because of him?" "No," Loses who firmly denied it. "Okay." Jongwonan spread the hand that was not held by Loses who. "I just suddenly wanted to read aloud." "Don't worry about it." Loses who wanted the little girl to forget about it. After all, it was too embarrassing. "Oh," Jongwonan replied in a long voice. "Let me tell you a secret." Secretly, Jongwonan suddenly stopped and said. "What?" Loses who asked doubtfully. Jongwonan looked around and saw that there was no one around, and motioned to Loses who to squat down. "You can't tell others," Jongwonan said first. "Okay," Loses who assured solemnly. Hearing Loses who's answer, Jongwonan felt relieved. She leaned into his ear and said, "The birthday wish I made last night was." Jongwonan had just finished speaking when Loses who hurriedly stood up straight and covered her mouth to prevent her from continuing. "It's not allowed to say it, I won't listen, and I probably guessed that your wish will come true," Loses who said seriously. Jongwonan blinked her big eyes. When Loses who removed the hand covering her mouth, she asked in disbelief, "You know?" "How did you know?" Maybe it's because we have a good connection." "Have you guessed it? Have you made a lot of wishes?" "Only 3. "I don't know either. I think I can make another guess. Tell me every time your wish comes true." "Okay." "Okay." Two people walked hand in hand on the cobblestone path and made an agreement. "Can I eat the delicious food invited by Jiangbai Hui?" Jongwonan, a snack shop, asked suddenly. She felt that this was the key. Loses who was speechless for a moment, then hit her on the head and said, "You're worthless. I'll buy you whatever you want to eat." "But he wants to invite you." Jongwonan shook the hands held by the two of them and smiled brightly, "Have to please and have to be really happy." Loses who sighed, "Don't go too far." Loses who relaxed. "No, I promise." Jongwonan raised 4 fingers under the sun and said. End of this chapter. The Lu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yoon. Chapter 104. Chapter 104. Love is free. By the time the two walked back to the house hand in hand, Lin 11 and Lu Lin were already dressed and ready to go out. When Lu Lin saw the two of them coming in, he glanced at them and said, "I came back after being away for so long. I thought you guys were eloping. We don't like this. In our family, love means freedom." "Dad, you are very good at what you said." Later Loses who praised. "Isn't it good in the front?" "No, we won't elope," Jongwonan said seriously. After saying this, Lu Lin and Lin 11 helped each other and started laughing. It was so fun for the little girl to talk, they thought to themselves. "Where are you going?" Loses who asked. "Go to the hospital and find out about your Aunt Tang's condition." "Are you going?" Lin 11 said and raised her eyebrows. "You guys go back and do your homework." "Haven't you finished your homework yet?" Lu Lin asked. Jongwonan and Loses who looked at each other. "I've finished writing." Loses who said. "I originally wanted to do my homework in the morning and spend time with my mother in the afternoon. How about reversing the situation?" Jongwonan poked her chin and said. "Okay, let's go change clothes and go together." Lu Lin nodded. After changing their clothes, the 4 of them walked out of the door. The family needs to be neat and tidy. Lulin, who fastened his seat belt, patted his thigh and said. Sit down and let's go, kids, Lulin said and started the car. I always have a hunch that Au may wake up soon, today or tomorrow. Lin 11 frowned and said seriously. Lulin glanced sideways at the little girl in the back row who was listening attentively, and whispered, your premonition is good, but we still have to see what the doctor says. But women's premonitions are very accurate. Lin 11 insisted on her premonition. But we have to believe in science, Lulin also insisted. Okay, believe it, Lin 11 held her forehead helplessly. This man was serious, couldn't he just let her go? We have to believe in my mother, a clear and firm voice sounded from the back row. Lulin and Lin 11 glanced sideways at the little girl looking out the window. They suddenly felt that what the little girl said was realistic. At this moment, Zhangwanan might be more like an adult, and they were more like immature children. It was past the rush hour and the road was not congested. Lulin drove to the hospital quickly. After he got out of the car, the family neatly walked into the hospital hand in hand. At this moment, their family has become a beautiful scenery. Both the patients and the doctors in the hospital have all focused on them with burning eyes. Am I too beautiful? They are all looking at me. Zhangwanan was held in the middle by Lu Zizhu and Lin 11. Yes, you are so beautiful, Lu Zizhu smiled fondly. Then am I the most beautiful in your heart? Zhangwanan asked playfully, tilting her head. No, Lu Zizhu said with a smile, wanting to tease her. Zhangwanan tilted his head and turned his head with a hum. Son, your emotional intelligence needs to be improved. Lin 11 said helplessly. I was just teasing her, Lu Zizhu said and was about to pinch Zhangwanan's face, but she dodged him. It's over, you're angry now, you still have to learn from your father, son, Lulin, the visitor, sighed. Lin 11 became helpless again, thinking that this guy was too confident in himself. Not long after, the four of them arrived at the doctor's office with the envious eyes of everyone in the hospital. Doctor, let's find out about Tang Yu's recent situation, Lin 11 asked after entering the door and sitting down. The doctor glanced at the computer screen, frowned, and tapped his fingers on the table a few times. End of this chapter. The Lu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yun. Chapter 105. Chapter 105. Where did he go? The doctor glanced at the computer screen, frowned, and tapped his fingers on the table a few times. These actions of the doctor made all four people become worried. Lin 11 looked at the doctor nervously, grabbed Lulin's wrist firmly, took a deep breath and said, yes, there is something wrong. Lin 11 did not say the next words. The doctor clicked the mouse, turned sideways and looked at the family sitting in front of him and said seriously, the patient is in good condition, and the little girl often comes to talk to her, so you don't have to worry. Then your expression just now and the fact that you were banging on the table were. Lin 11's anxious heart calmed down a little. Ah, I was checking on another patient, so you don't have to worry, the doctor explained hurriedly. Lin 11's heart dropped completely, including the three people next to him. They all took a long breath, then thanked the doctor and went to the ward. As soon as he walked out of the door, he saw a little nurse running over in a hurry. She stumbled and accidentally touched Lin 11. The little nurse hurriedly apologized. Lin 11 smiled empathetically and said it was okay. Then he saw the little nurse breaking into the door they had just walked out of. Dr. Zhang, the patient in bed 26 is awake, because the little nurse went in without closing the door. Her voice came out from inside and reached the ears of the four people who had not gone far. Number 26, Lin 11 muttered silently. Four of us, look at me and I look at you. Isn't number 26 the hospital bed where Tang Yu is? Their hearts tightened and joy appeared on their faces. Then the four of them quickly ran towards the ward in a hurry. For some reason, Lin 11 and Zhangwanan felt that their vision was blurry while they were running, and their eyes were sore and uncomfortable. but Lu Lin and Lu Zizu felt that their hearts were about to jump out of their throats. As soon as Zhang Wanan rushed into the ward, she yelled "Mom" as usual, but this time she yelled with all her strength. The sound was so loud that people in the corridor could hear it, and they couldn't help but stop to check. In the past, no one paid attention to her when she came in and shouted, but today, someone finally paid attention to her. The person on the bed looked sallow, his cheeks were sunken, and he looked very sick, but the smile on his face was very bright. Zhang Wanan ran over and hugged Tang Yu, whispering about her mother in a low voice, one sentence after another, which made people feel distressed. Enan. Tang Yu opened his mouth slightly, his voice was hoarse because he hadn't spoken for a long time. Mom, you finally woke up. I thought you didn't want me anymore. Zhang Wanan cried and twitched, looking very pitiful. She's grown so tall. Tang Yu reached out tremblingly and touched the top of her hair. Mom, you have been sleeping for 6 years, and I am already 7 years old. Zhang Wanan lay in her arms and muttered. Tang Yu wrapped his arms around Zhang Wanan's body. She had just woken up and was still very weak, but she still tried her best to hold her tight. Mother and daughter hugged each other tightly, Lin 11's eyes filled with tears. The tears were like broken beads at the moment. She should be happy, but she couldn't help but want to cry. 11. Tang Yu, who was lying on the bed, opened his mouth and shouted in a hoarse voice. I'm here, I'm here. Lin 11 hurriedly ran over and held her hand. Thank you as a family for so many years. That's right, just wake up. Tang Yu nodded and looked around the ward. She found that they were the only family in the ward. She opened her mouth. Where is Lao Zhang? Why didn't he come? Where did he go? End of this chapter. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Lu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yun. Chapter 106. Chapter 106, Not an actor, can't act. Tang Yu nodded and looked around the ward. She found that they were the only family in the ward. She opened her mouth. Where is Lao Zhang? Why didn't he come? Where did he go? Hearing her mother ask about her father, Zhang Wanan also raised her head and looked at Lin 11 expectantly, wanting to hear Lin 11's answer. Mom has woken up. Dad should be here, right? Zhang Wanan thought. Lin Ziming. Where is Lao Zhang? Tang Yu asked again when he saw that Lin 11 didn't speak. We haven't informed him yet. Lao Lu, you call Lao Lu. Call Lao Lu and tell him that Au woke up. Lin 11 turned around and blinked to ask Lu Lin to go out. Call up. Tang Yu was still unconscious when Lao Zhang passed away, so she didn't know anything about Lao Zhang. Moreover, she had just woken up and was still very fragile. She couldn't give her a blow, so she had to find a good time to tell her. Lu Lin understood what his wife meant, nodded quickly and said, I'll inform him. Tang Yu looked at their performance and nodded clearly. She touched Zhang Wanan's head and closed her eyes. She knew how big the accident was that day and how serious it was. Because of the accident, she became a vegetative state and lay there for several years. What's more, Lao Zhang had protected her back then, so she must have been seriously injured. Looking at them like this, she had already guessed where Lao Lu was now. They were just afraid that she wouldn't be able to bear the blow. You see, Anan is so old now, you should spend more time with her. Lin 11 brought the topic to Zhang Wanan. Zhang Wanan raised her head and looked at Tang Yu, waiting for her answer. Tang Yu turned his head to the side and said softly, and then shed tears in his closed eyes. Zhang Wanan was a little disappointed, but she just thought her mother had just woken up and was acting like this. She thought her mother should love her very much. From now on, she will also have a mother. She will wait for her father to come back, Zhang Wanan thought. Tang Yu, who had just woken up, was a little weak and fell asleep after a while. 4 people showed up at the doctor's office again. "Congratulations to you and your little friend, Mom is finally awake, right?" the doctor first congratulated them. "Yes," Zhang Wanan nodded excitedly. The doctor looked at them with a smile and said, "The patient has no problems now. He just needs to do some rehabilitation. You don't have to worry." "Okay, okay, thank you." Dr. Lin 11 thanked her solemnly. Lu Zizhu took Zhang Wanan's hand and sat on the bench, waiting for Tang Yu to wake up. "One of my wishes has been fulfilled, and there are 2 left." Zhang Wanan smiled brightly. "It will come true." Lu Zizhu looked at her and smiled softly. His smile was very healing. On the other side, Lin 11 and Lu Lin were silent at the end of the corridor. "Should we keep it a secret?" Lin 11 asked, breaking the silence. "I saw Tang Yu's expression when I came out. She should have guessed it. After all, the car accident was tragic and she was the person involved." Lu Lin analyzed. "You mean she already knows? Well, wait until she is discharged from the hospital to take good care of her, and then find a suitable time to tell her. You can't hide it all the time, right? She is not Inan." "Okay, what about Inan? Should I hide it or tell her?" "Let's keep it a secret for now. What will Tang Yu say when we see it? It is also difficult for them. These secrets are kept deep in their hearts and they have to be carefully kept from them. They are not actors and cannot act, so they can only use poor acting skills to keep the secrets deep in their hearts and look for a good opportunity." The 2 of them agreed to go back and sit on the bench waiting for Tang Yu to wake up. End of this chapter. The Lu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yun. Chapter 107. Chapter 107, If you can't be a daughter, you can still be a daughter-in-law. It was already 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon when Tang Yu woke up again. Although Zhang Wanan and Tang Yu have not communicated verbally or physically for 6 years, they are still connected by flesh and blood, so they get along very well. "Blood is thicker than water," Lin 11, who was sitting on the side, said with emotion. Lu Lin took Lin 11's hand and patted it gently, signaling her not to be jealous. They had a nutritious dinner together in the hospital. The hospital food was very unpalatable, but this night they were all happy from the bottom of their hearts. No matter how bad the food was, it did not affect their mood at all. Tang Yu still needs to do some rehabilitation training. For convenience, she still stays in the hospital and is taken care of by dedicated personnel. When the family returned home in the evening, while changing their shoes, Zhang Wanan suddenly had an idea and patted his head and said, "The homework is not done yet. Ah, I'm dead. It's fun to have fun for a while, but it's miserable to do homework." Lu Zizhu said leisurely, feeling very embarrassed. "I'm so playful. I saw my mother wake up, so I was so happy that I forgot about it," Zhang Wanan said loudly with a red face. "Then please be happy and forget about going to school tomorrow." Lu Zizhu gloated a little. Zhang Wanan ignored him and stomped upstairs angrily. Facing his straight son Lin 11 and Lu Lin, they sighed, thinking how could they have such a stupid son? I don't know who inherited this emotional intelligence. "Son, go and coax her." Lin 11 pointed upstairs. "I know." Lu Zizhu sighed helplessly and put his pockets in his pockets to go upstairs. Lu Zizhu walked to her door, sighed and knocked on the door. Then I heard approaching footsteps coming from inside, and then the door opened. Zhang Wanan inside opened the door and rolled his eyes when he saw Lu Zizhu at the door. Just when Lu Zizhu was about to go in, Zhang Wanan slammed the door shut with a clang sound. "I've happily forgotten who you are, let's go," Zhang Wanan said through the door, and then walked further away. Lu Zizhu touched his nose awkwardly, thinking that he was almost disfigured. "Can you do it all?" Lu Zizhu asked through the door. "You don't have to worry about it. It has nothing to do with you," Zhang Wanan inside replied angrily. Lu Lin and Lin 11, who were passing by Zhang Wanan's room, took a look at their silly son and thought to themselves that this was their own fault. In desperation, Lin 11 had to take action personally. She knocked on Zhang Wanan's door and said, "It's me Anan. Here comes Mom." Then the door opened again, and Zhang Wanan glanced at the three people standing at the door, a little surprised. She ignored Lu Zizhu and asked, "Are you okay, Mom or Dad?" Lin 11 smiled awkwardly, reached out and poked Lu Zizhu's waist to signal him to speak quickly. Lu Zizhu looked at Lin 11 and then at Zhang Wanan and said, "Why are you poking me? What about you? Are you okay?" This was addressed to Lin 11. Lin 11 was a little doubtful about life. She glared at Lu Zizhu with a look of hatred, thinking that it would be better to throw away the son as soon as possible. "What, haven't you finished your homework yet? Let your brother go in and teach you, okay?" Lin 11 asked. Zhang Wanan glanced at Lu Zizhu and whispered, "No need. Let my brother teach you. What if you don't know how to do it?" Lin 11 continued. After Lin 11 finished speaking, she quickly pushed Lu Zizhu, pushed him in and said, "Hurry up and teach my sister." Zhang Wanan compromised, but Lu Zizhu stupidly said, "She doesn't have to." Lin 11, Zhang Wanan. Lu Lin, who had been silent all the time, couldn't stand it any longer. He didn't know what to do, so he kicked Lu Zizhu, and then violently closed the door with a deafening sound. "Go if I tell you to go, I have to kick you." Lu Lin clapped his hands and said. Although the kick was not heavy, Lu Zizhu was a little confused for a moment after he was kicked in. "If you can't be a daughter, you can still be a daughter-in-law," Lu Lin said as he entered the bedroom. Lin 11 nodded and said nothing. End of this chapter. The Lu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yun. Chapter 108. Chapter 108. You are 100 times happier than other children. On the other side, Lu Zizhu, who had been kicked in, stood there awkwardly, neither sitting nor walking. "Why don't you sit down?" Lu Zizhu, who was doing his homework, glanced at him and asked. Lu Zizhu coughed awkwardly and then walked over and sat aside. "Is there anything I can't do?" he asked. "Not yet. You can read a book." Zhang Wanan pointed to the book on the table and said. Lu Zizhu glanced at it and thought it was so childish, like a kindergarten kid, but he picked it up anyway. The air suddenly became quiet, except for the sound of their breathing. After a while, Zhang Wanan glanced at him secretly and nudged him with her elbow. "Does it hurt?" "Huh? What?" Lu Zizhu was a little confused. "Just, Dad kicked you." "Did it hurt?" Zhang Wanan lowered his head unnaturally as he spoke. "You care about me so much." Lu Zizhu suddenly smiled evilly and moved closer to look at her. Zhang Wanan instantly blushed to her ears. "I don't care, just ask." She felt as if her head was about to sink into her stomach. Lu Zizhu smiled, sat down and said, "It doesn't hurt. Just write quickly. Do you still want to sleep?" "I want to," Zhang Wanan said with an aggrieved flat mouth. After a while, Zhang Wanan pushed the book in front of Lu Zizhu and asked sheepishly, How do you do this?" Lu Zizhu glanced at it and whispered, "Stupid pig." Zhang Wanan snorted, thinking that you are the stupid pig. Lu Zizhu pointed and explained to her. Zhang Wanan was not stupid, and the questions were not difficult, so he soon wrote down the solution process. When she was about to finish writing, she suddenly said, "Today my mother suddenly woke up and I felt like it was a dream, unreal." "But it's true, there's no need to doubt it," Lu Zizhu said. "I hope to have a father and mother like other children, but if my father comes back, I will be happier than other children, because I have two parents, and a brother who loves me very much." Zhang Wanan said. He smiled happily, with tears in his eyes. Lu Zizhu sighed inwardly, touched her head and said, "You are 100 times happier than other children." "I feel it." Zhang Wanan smiled brightly. The two people looked at each other and smiled. Lu Zizhu pointed at her homework with his finger and said, "I haven't finished my homework yet." Why are you giggling? Jongwanan pouted and said dissatisfiedly, didn't you laugh too? Loses who shrugged helplessly, as if that was indeed the case, but you still have to do your homework, right? Loses who said. Jongwanan nodded and devoted himself to the unfinished homework without any distracting thoughts. By the time she finished her homework, it was already more than half an hour later. It was almost 9:30. Jongwanan covered her mouth and couldn't stop yawning. Loses who was also a little sleepy. Go to bed early, I'm going back to the room first, Loses who said. Jongwanan nodded and went to the bathroom, but before Loses who closed the door, Jongwanan stopped him, can you help me pack my school bag? Loses who nodded, I'll come over and help you clean up after I finish taking a shower. I think I should be faster than you. Jongwanan nodded, hit his head again, and closed the door. Sure enough, as Loses who said, he took a shower very quickly. After taking a shower, he came over to pack Jongwanan's school bag, but Jongwanan was still taking a bath in the bathroom. Jongwanan was still in the bathroom until Loses who finished cleaning up. End of this chapter. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The Liu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yoon. Chapter 109. Chapter 109. The father I have never met. Loses who thought for a while that he might as well wait for the little girl to come out before going back to the room, so he sat at the table and read Jongwanan's childish book. Loses who accidentally saw a drawing book. He opened it curiously and found that only the first page of the drawing book was drawn, and the rest were blank. He stroked the painting carefully. There were 6 people on it, standing among the flowers, but there was a man without a face. Loses who guessed that the painting showed his family and Jongwanan's family respectively, and the faceless man should be Jongwanan's father whom he had never met. Loses who sighed and tore off the only page with pictures on it with a stab sound. Just at this time, the bathroom door clicked open. Loses who took a look and hurriedly stuffed the painting into his pocket, and then walked up to Jongwanan as if nothing happened. Have you washed it? Jongwanan was already a little sleepy and didn't even notice him tearing up the paper. He nodded and walked towards the bed. Loses who followed her over and tucked her into bed when she lay down. The quilt gently pinched her cheek and said dotingly, go to bed early, little lazy pig. Jongwanan nodded, found a comfortable position to lie down and hugged the doll on his side, and said vaguely, good night. Loses who adjusted a suitable temperature for her, turned off the light, closed the door and walked out. He reached out and took out the paper in his pocket and rubbed it a few times. The expression on his face could not be seen in the dark night. Because a child was doing homework last night, he went to bed a little late, so he couldn't wake up the next day. Lin 11 looked at the time and was a little anxious, but she didn't know how to call her, so she couldn't beat her, right? She was reluctant to give it up. If it were Loses who, she would be willing to give it up. Xiaozhou, Lin 11 shouted from upstairs to downstairs. A minute or so later, Loses who slowly walked up. He lowered his head to fasten the buttons on his cuffs, lazily raised his head and raised his eyebrows, and asked, what's wrong? Stop making that hole of yours. What will happen if Anan doesn't get up? Why don't you go call me? Lin 11 said anxiously. Her silly son was still buttoning up so gracefully at this time, which made her angry just looking at him. Loses who was still fastening the buttons unhurriedly. After he fastened them, he was finally willing to raise his head and look at Lin 11. Go quickly. Otherwise I'll ask your dad to come up and kick you again. Lin 11 raised her foot to pretend to threaten him. Loses who felt embarrassed when he thought about the kick last night. He calmly touched his buttocks and said, get off, I'll call you. After speaking, he entered Jongwanan's room. Get up, you're going to be late, Little lazy pig, loses who said as he walked into the room and opened the curtains with a swish sound. Jongwanan seemed to feel the dazzling sunlight in her sleep. She hummed with dissatisfaction and turned her back to the sunlight. It couldn't disturb her anyway. Loses who shook his head helplessly, thinking that this was too lazy. He walked over and wanted to pull her quilt, but he felt something was wrong, so he reached out and poked her face. Jongwanan waved his hand like a fly to express his dissatisfaction. Want to be late? Loses who asked. No one paid any attention to him. So Loses who continued to poke her cheeks, and when she saw no response other than waving her hand, he reached out to tickle her. Jongwanan finally had some momentum to wake up from her sleep. She waved her hand and opened her eyes drowsily to see that it was Loses who then hugged the hands that made her sleep restless and disruptive. End of this chapter. The Lu family's wife is so sweet. Author, Yoon. Chapter 110. Chapter 110. Peeping Tom. Loses who felt stiff all over when his hand was hugged, and he didn't know what to do next. You were arrested? Jongwanan muttered in his sleep. Loses who couldn't help but raise the corners of his mouth when he saw the little girl snoozing and looking cute when she spoke. He tried to free his arm, but the little girl was holding her tightly, and he didn't dare to use any force for fear that she would be angry. He slowly squatted in front of the bed and said softly, "Get up, I'm going to be late." "I don't." Jongwanan, who was snoozing, murmured. "Then let go of my arm," Loses who said helplessly. So Jongwanan turned over and no longer held Loses who's arm. Instead, he vaguely touched around and brought over a doll and held it in his arms. It seemed that he would only feel safe if he held something in his arms. Loses who stood up and looked down at the unconscious little girl sleeping on the bed, feeling helpless. He bent down and picked her up. Jongwanan wrinkled her nose in discomfort in her arms. Just when she was about to lose her temper again, she heard Loses who's gentle voice reaching her ears. "Be good and don't move. I'll take you to wash up," he coaxed softly. Hearing these words, Jongwanan did not move again. He obediently leaned his head on his chest and fell asleep peacefully. Loses who sighed helplessly, thinking, what can he do? Just pamper her, it won't matter anyway. There is a chair in the bathroom with a circle to prevent it from falling. It may have been tailor-made for Jongwanan, but it was a baby chair when she was a child. Although it was a thing from her childhood, it is still useful now. For example, now, Loses who put her into the chair, held her head and washed her face to wake her up, and then brush her teeth and so on. Loses who is tall, Jongwanan is already short, and the chair is not high, so Loses who has to work hard and keep bending down while washing her. Fortunately, after washing up, the little scoundrel was almost sober. "Brother, you are so kind." Jongwanan looked up at Loses who had just finished washing herself. Loses who took her out and said, "Of course, you are a lazy little pig. If you don't get up, you will be really late." Jongwanan smiled sheepishly, "Not next time." "Do you want a next time? You are so heavy." After speaking, Loses who threw her on the bed and said, "I'm going out, you can change clothes." Jongwanan curled her lips, but she was not angry that Loses who disliked her for being fat. Instead, she laughed stupidly after Loses who went out. That smile was uncontrollable and a little shy. As soon as Loses who walked out of Jongwanan's room, he was startled by Lin 11 who was hiding aside. He looked at Jongwanan's room and then at the smiling Lin 11, then remembered that he had left the door open, and judging from the looks of it, this woman must have stayed and witnessed everything. Peeping Tom, Loses who threw down these 3 words and quickly ran downstairs. Lin 11 smiled and hurriedly held the armrest to read, then gave Loses who a thumbs up. It seems to be saying, "Son, you are awesome. Your emotional intelligence finally increased a little overnight." But she didn't see Loses whose face turn red out of embarrassment at all. Jongwanan went downstairs and ate a few hurriedly, and then took a few pieces of bread to eat in the car. Luzes, who looked at her gobbling up food and complained, "If you had gotten up early, you wouldn't be like this." Jongwanan was busy eating the bread and only responded with a hum. End of this chapter.